and I'll be chairing the webinar in place of the chair of the Cybercrime Working Group, Attorney General of Tonga, Ms. Linda Falamuetu. Unfortunately, you cannot be here with us today. On behalf of the Cybercrime Working Group, I am delighted to open our webinar on cyberbullying, the first of our two-part webinar series on cybercrime and children in a COVID-19 world. COVID-19 has changed the world as we know it. While we have been forced to physically distance, we have become more connected through the internet, adapting to remote work, learning, and video calls. Cybercriminals have adjusted to our increased online engagement, rendering children more vulnerable than ever in the new criminal landscape. The increased use of the internet, social media, and online platforms generally comes with many risks. Today's webinar explores one of these increasing risks, cyberbullying. This has grown in prevalence in relation to children with increased access to technology and more daily interactions carried out in the online space. While these harmful practices take place online and enable perpetrators to carry out these harmful activities with a level of anonymity, they translate to very real world harms. Our speakers today will share their wealth of knowledge on this topic, including identifying opportunities for us to improve our means of protecting children from cyberbullying in our region. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of all presentations during the question and answer portion of the webinar. Please feel free to submit any questions during the presentations via the chat function, and we can address them at the end. Alternatively, we can take questions from the floor using the raise hand function. It is my pleasure to introduce our four speakers today. We have with us, firstly, Professor Amanda Third, the Professorial Research Fellow in the Institute of Culture and Society at Western Sydney University, co-director of the Young and Resilient Research Centre, research stream co-lead in the Centre for Resilient and Inclusive Societies in the Victorian Government, and faculty associate in the Burke and Klein Centre for Internet and Society at Harvard. An international expert in child-centered participatory research, her work investigates children's technology practices, focusing on marginalized groups and rights-based approaches. She has led child-centered projects to understand children's experiences of the digital age in over 70 countries, working with partners across corporate, government, and not-for-profit sectors and children and young people themselves. We also have with us today Ms. Annie Dunn Palelevuka, Commissioner of the Fiji Online Safety Commission, is the lead executive of Fiji's only established commission that is dedicated to developing a safe online culture for all Fijians. The Online Safety Commission gives individuals a space to resolve concerns and complaints with respect to online abuse and promotes online safety through community awareness programs, school awareness sessions, and social media. Recognizing the power of collaboration, Ms. Dunn seeks to promote safe online habits alongside key stakeholders with interests that lie beyond the digital realm. Ms. Dunn is a fitness enthusiast, an avid reader, who loves to champion young Fijians to use their voices to impact decision-making spaces in their communities. We also have with us today Ms. Kelly Fallon, Manager of the Online Harm Policy at the Australian eSafety Commission. Ms. Fallon joined eSafety in early 2019 as a Senior Legal and Policy Advisor, providing a broad range of support and advice across the Office regulatory, educational, and policy work, with a focus on issues relating to children and young people, online terrorism, and transparency standards for the digital industry. She recently moved into eSafety's investigations branch, where she is supporting the development of an insights capability to guide strategic policy in relation to existing and emerging online harms. Ms. Talon holds law degrees from Harvard Law School, where she participated in the Cyber Law Clinic at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, and from the University of New South Wales, where she studied media and technology law. Fourthly, we have Ms. Ella Serri, Assistant Manager, the International Strategy and Futures at the Australian eSafety Commission. Ms. Serri joined eSafety in early 2019 as a Senior Education Advisor, delivering policy and project initiatives focused on school education, including the eSafety Toolkit for Schools. Ella currently leads eSafety's international capacity building initiatives and is focused on strategic engagements with other governments as they look to establish online safety regulators. Prior to joining eSafety, Ella developed and delivered a number of child safety and student well-being initiatives across government and the non-government sector. Ella holds an MSc in Policy and Human Services from University and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Melbourne. Her master's thesis looked at policy responses to sexting and focus on curriculum. Additionally, we have with us today Ms. Jasmine G from Think in Colour, who will be live scribing the webinar to create a poster, which will be shared on the PILON website after today's webinar. Without further ado, I will now hand the floor to Professor Third. In her talk, Professor Third will draw on recent research she and her team have conducted in partnership with Child Fund Australia and Plan International Australia to document children's and families' experiences using technology in Kiribati, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. She will reflect on what this study suggests we need to do to support children in the Pacific region to deal with cyberbullying. She will then talk briefly about some international developments in the online safety space. Ms. Third, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a great honour to be with you this morning, and thank you very much for the invitation. Today, what I'm going to do is firstly just run through a definition of cyberbullying for you, and then I want to think quite precisely about the protective factors that have been shown to enable children to deal with and also to stop them perpetrating cyberbullying. And what I'll do as I talk through those protective factors is I will reflect on a study that, as has just been mentioned, we've conducted in the Pacific, in parts of the Pacific last year. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the movements, if you like, that are taking place in the online safety sphere more broadly and what they might mean for cyberbullying. So firstly, though, just let me tell you very briefly about the work that we've been doing. Over the last decade, we've been working to develop some research methods for children across the world to contribute their insights about how technology is impacting their everyday lives, their relationships with family, their education, their health, and much, much more. And we've now worked with 2,500 children in over 70 countries. This slide is slightly out of date. We've also had a strong focus on rights-based approaches to children's digital practices. And I'm going to say a lot more about this later on, and I will also provide you with some links to these resources shortly. What I want to focus on is a study that we've done on online safety in the Pacific. I should emphasise that the research methods that we use are qualitative. One thing that is really missing from the landscape in the Pacific is actually some good, strong, high-quality data that we can use to inform the kinds of policy and regulatory responses that we develop to a range of online safety issues. So this is not the statistics we need, but this was a deep dive into children's, parents and carers, and key stakeholders in 3 countries, their perceptions about how children are engaging online, what the risks of harm are in those settings, and what the possibilities and opportunities might be for children who are using technology. So we worked in Kiribati, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea, and I'm going to reflect on these findings for you a little bit today. But first of all, what is cyberbullying? So very simply, cyberbullying is bullying that takes place with the use of digital technologies. It's not restricted to a particular platform, and indeed it can take place on social media, messaging platforms, gaming platforms, mobile phones, you name it, any device can be used for cyberbullying. But I think it's very, very important to point out early that this is not a digital-only phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that takes place online, but also spills over into children's offline lives. So it very rarely occurs on its own via digital technology. It's often accompanied by face-to-face bullying. Importantly, and this is something we always have to stress with children, is that cyberbullying does constitute a repeated behaviour. A one-off unpleasant interaction does not constitute cyberbullying. It has to be repeated. It has to have that aim of scaring, angering, or shaming those who are targeted. And I think it's you know, so we need to be very careful to distinguish cyberbullying from the other kinds of drama that unfold online between children and young people. It is a phenomenon that can have very serious and very long-term effects. And these, you know, and there have been instances in which cyberbullying has had devastating effects, sometimes resulting in suicide and so on. So we do need to be really attentive to this problem. We need to be working early to make sure that we are creating the kinds of contexts in which children can have positive interactions online. And that is a whole of community activity. It needs to be something that different organisations and institutions across corporate, not-for-profit, government and research sectors need to participate in. We need to collaborate. We need to coordinate our action, because it is true that children's digital practices unfold in complex digital ecosystems. So we need to be paying attention to all the different components of those ecosystems. I think one thing about cyberbullying that perhaps distinguishes it, or a couple of things that distinguish it from face-to-face bullying. Of course, cyberbullying has the capacity to be 24/7, you know, in an always-on kind of environment where children are interacting with technology very regularly. There is capacity for cyberbullying to be much more persistent and prominent via digital platforms than it is in face-to-face settings. But one of the things we have working in our favour in terms of managing the threat of cyberbullying is, of course, that it leaves a digital footprint. And so one of the things that we need to be very careful we're doing is skilling children and young people to understand how to screenshot and track those digital traces when they're experiencing cyberbullying, so that they can evidence them and that helps to bring the behaviours to an end. All right, so I want to just talk very briefly through some protective factors. So, and in doing so, I want to reflect on some of the kinds of things that we learned as we worked with children and their families and the broader community in the Pacific last year. First of all, one thing that's really important is awareness raising. If children can have a strong awareness of what cyberbullying is, and an awareness of the kinds of strategies that they can implement to protect themselves, this is this takes us a long way to dealing with the challenges. And what we found when we were in the Solomons is indeed that children have begun to receive, not just the Solomons, Solomons, Kiribati and Papua New Guinea. Children have begun to receive cyber safety education, and a key focus of that has been cyberbullying. And so what we're seeing is that children know that there is this thing called cyberbullying. They know it's not a good thing and that they need to protect themselves from it. But actually that hasn't translated into a really strong understanding yet of what constitutes cyberbullying and how to manage it appropriately. So while they know the term cyberbullying, it hasn't been brought to life for them in meaningful ways yet. And I think this goes to the heart of a comment that can be made about much cyber safety education across the globe. And that is that when we're addressing children's risks, or the risks of harm with children, we don't do a good enough job of connecting the potential very serious risks of harm with their everyday lived experience and their digital practices that they know. So this is one thing I think we need to get much better at. We also know that digital literacy is a protective factor. So strong digital literacy means you have strong skills and competencies for navigating the internet, you understand how the internet and technology and devices work, and you're able to respond accordingly. It's about knowing the norms and the social kind of etiquettes, if you like, of engaging online. And it's also about being able to identify those risks of harm. So it connects in with this idea of awareness. In terms of digital literacy across the Pacific, what we're finding is that children generally have most children have relatively undeveloped digital literacies, and this is largely a consequence of the fact that they haven't yet had extensive exposure to technology at the level of their everyday lives. And so what we know is that as children's exposure to technology increases, so too does their digital literacy. And indeed, this may be one of the unintended consequences, positive consequences of the pandemic, in as much as because children have had to connect using technology, they've also had to kind of upskill very rapidly. So digital literacy really key, but I think there's quite a lot of work to be done there to really build their competencies in this area. One thing that really stood out to us as we worked through the region in those 3 countries was that there haven't yet been really good culturally appropriate metaphors for explaining to children how the internet works and who it connects them to. So we need to actually really go back to basics. Children need to really understand how the internet works, not in a detailed way, but with enough information for them to make wise decisions. For children, in the case of cyberbullying, for children to understand that when they bully someone online, it's traceable, it potentially spreads quickly to other people, so the audiences are much larger. There's a potential for much deeper forms of harm. So we really need to build these digital literacy skills if we're going to tackle the issue of cyberbullying. Another key protective factor for cyberbullying is strong peer and family networks. And there's no doubt that across the region, family is really important. Religion also plays a strong role here in asserting family values. But this is a real strength, I think, for the region in terms of being able to tackle cyberbullying. Strong peer and family networks are necessary because children need support during these times. So they need to be able to turn to their peers or to their families to ask for advice and guidance. The thing that we need to tackle in the region is that actually, at the moment, parents' digital literacies are not much more advanced than children's own digital literacies. So what this means for children is that they don't always have those strong networks of knowledgeable adults around them to help guide and strengthen their digital practices. So it's really important as we look to tackle cyberbullying that we not only look at boosting the digital literacy of children, but also that of their families. There also need to be strong, another protective factor is strong pathways to support services. And this is an area where I know there's a lot of investment underway, but being able to turn to helplines and to be able to interface with frontline workers who are trained in digital related forms of harm and how to respond to them are going to be vital going forward. And lastly, probably of most interest to this particular audience, there need to be mechanisms of redress. And again, I understand that there are enormous efforts underway to think about the legislative and regulatory contexts and to ensure that we are, that children have access to appropriate forms of remedy. Okay, so I just want to turn now just to think about cyberbullying in the broader context of online safety and to talk you through some of the approaches that I think are working well. Firstly, I think the aim of, we need to remember that the aim of all online safety education, including that which targets cyberbullying, is to build children's resilience so that technology becomes a tool for them to survive and adapt to change, but also to transform the circumstances that cause adversity in the first place. So we really want to think resilience productively and transformatively, I think. And I think also we want to remember that the difference between an individual who is resilient and one who is not so resilient is actually the strength of their social networks. So resilience is not just an individual capacity, but also a social and relational capacity. And I think another thing is that we need, when we are addressing risk, we need to remember that the aim of online safety education of all kinds is not completely to eliminate risk. And that's because there is a very complicated relationship between risk, harm, and benefit. Taking risks online is actually important for children to be able to develop the kinds of literacies and competencies that enable them to protect themselves from the kinds of harm that we would want to prevent. Taking risks online can lead either to harm or to benefit, and sometimes to both simultaneously. So one of the big challenges for online safety in the region is, as we work to mitigate the risks that children might face of harm, we don't close down the opportunities that that technology can offer them. So there are indeed a range of positive impacts for digital engagement, ranging from the impacts on education and health right through to strengthening relationships and sense of belonging and local cultural identity. And we need to take strengths-based approaches in this space. We need to empower children to take action and to manage these challenges in partnership with their peers, their families, and their broader communities. So taking risks is important. It's okay to be a little bit vulnerable, because by being vulnerable, we learn to deal with potential risks of harm. So one way that we've managed to, or one way that I find personally very, very useful in terms of approaching these debates, is to take a rights-based approach to online safety. As you may know, children have three broad categories of rights under the Convention for the Rights of the Child: those of provision, those of protection, and those of participation. And the very important thing to remember about rights-based approaches is that children have indeed a very wide range of rights. There are four guiding principles to the Convention that sort of drive the implementation of the Convention, but ultimately the challenge for us is to advance all of children's rights simultaneously. So these rights are indivisible. They have to be progressed in tandem with one another over time. So I think it's very useful to take a rights-based approach, because we have to simultaneously balance that right to provision, right, the right to basic human needs, with the right to protection from violence of all kinds, with the right to participation, so the right to engage, the right to participate, the right to be part of decision-making in online domains. There are three kinds of ways in which we might think about children's rights in relation to digital media, and I think all of these apply across the planet, but I think this is a useful framework for us to take into the online safety debates in the region. Children do not have a right to digital media, even though they sometimes think they do, but I think increasingly we can think about how access is becoming an important mechanism for children to realise their other rights. So there's a need for us to focus in on making sure that children have access. There are children's rights as they play out in online spaces. And this includes, all the different ways that children's rights are infringed and supported as they interact online. But then I think we also need to think about the digital very expansively. So how can we think about the digital as a way for children to realise their full range of rights across online and offline spaces? So one recent development that I hope you'll be interested in is that the UN Committee for the Rights of the Child just 6 weeks ago has formally adopted a general comment on children's rights in relation to the digital environment. It's been through a long consultation process and many rounds of feedback, but it provides principled and evidence-based guidance to states as well as NGOs and the private sector for implementing the convention in the digital world. And it's this kind of tool that I would recommend that we all embrace as we seek to address the full range of online safety challenges and cyberbullying in particular. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I will now hand over to Annie Dunn, Commissioner of Fiji Online Safety Commission. Ms. Dunn will discuss Fiji's experience working to protect children in Fiji from harmful online practices, including working together with Fiji police. Annie, you have the floor.
Muluwinaka, good afternoon and good morning. I would just like to share my screen, but I don't think I can do that with us currently viewing Professor Third's screen at the moment. But thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the team for this invitation to be part of such an esteemed panel. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen now because technology is amazing. And so, yes, all right. And so we have, hopefully you can see the screen, and I'm going to be taking the next 15 minutes or so to just elaborate a bit more on the Online Safety Commission here in Fiji and take us through a bit of our observations from 2019 up until date. And so, again, my name is Annie, and I'm a part of the Online Safety Commission here, and we really work to, it's the first established agency in the country to work towards protecting our citizens online and protecting all individuals across the board. And particularly, we're more interested in educating and resourcing and raising awareness for safe online habits and safe and responsible online habits. So I'm going to see if yes, all right. So by way of introduction, the Online Safety Commission really sees or envisions an online safety conscious Fiji. And what we mean by that is that we really want to raise digital awareness. We really want to raise digital literacy around the country for, as Professor Third had mentioned, for individuals and particularly children and teenagers or young people to understand what the benefits are of being online and even the risks of being online so that they could make critical decisions and make informed decisions on certain information. And The Online Safety Commission is established by the Online Safety Act of 2018, and we were recently established with operations starting in January of 2019. And so it's been almost 3 years. We're rounding out to 2.5 years of really an amazing experience of being online because of the very change that we all talk about now with COVID-19 impacting the world last year. It was really interesting to see the different dynamics of what it meant to be online, and particularly when it came to online abuse, such as cyberbullying. And the Online Safety Commission has various roles, and two of our main roles is to be able to champion safe online habits, and our second is to safeguard Fijians from harmful online communication. And so we provide a space for individuals in particular to raise their concerns and online abuse reports with the Commission to be able to find appropriate methods of redress. And we also raise community awareness programs and school awareness programs to be able to advocate for safe online habits and ways that individuals can be proactive on their digital spaces. In speaking of those community awareness, though advocating for online safety is done in 3 streams at the moment, and that's through community awareness, which has been quite successful from last year. Upon signing an MOU with our Fiji police force here and our law enforcement agency, we've been able to navigate different community awareness programs and really reach out to young people, to children, and even adults. Last year, we reached out to more than 15 communities despite the COVID-19 impact, and that was also a little bit higher than the 2019 impact in terms of reaching out to communities, which was really interesting for us because while the world navigated COVID-19 in their respective ways, we were very blessed to be able to interact and still engage in community awarenesses by the second half of last year. And so those took place with Fiji Police and key stakeholders, Get Safe Online, with the United Kingdom and the Ministry of Women's REACH program here in Fiji. And so it was really good to get out into the communities and see what families and young people and children understood about online safety and especially cyberbullying. As Professor Third had mentioned, we did receive the same sort of sentiments when it came to everyone knowing what cyberbullying was or what the term was. But when we asked for definitions or when we asked what that would mean to them, it was a bit more difficult to define what exactly cyberbullying is. And so young people and children understand that it's an online abuse. They understand that it's harmful and it can happen to them at any time of the day, anywhere, because it's not something that just ends after school hours or starts after school hours, but it's really all throughout their day as long as they have that technology with them. And so it was really interesting to see that reflected in the different communities that we went to as well. And so our other outreach programs included visiting schools. And so from 2019 up until date, we visited more than 20 high schools and university campuses across the country. And that really looked at visiting schools and raising online safety with schools and students, but more so just getting an understanding of what it looked like to be online as young people, because it's an entire generation of people who are living with these digital spaces. And we've been able to have this opportunity to gain access to technology and gain access to the digital platforms. But it's a bit more different because parents and those of us who would be child carers are are not at a point of understanding what the full technology scope could be because they didn't grow up with it, because we didn't have that for a lot of the adults. And so having to teach that is not something that it's not something that they understood right off the bat. And so we found that when we went to high schools or when we went to universities, a lot of the students noted that their parents would ask them how to be on these digital platforms. Their parents or their grandparents would ask how they could set up an account. And so it's the relationship with technology is a bit more different in the sense that most of the students and most of the schools that we went to or university campuses that we went to raised this concern that there was a difficulty in understanding where to turn when seeking assistance when it came to online abuses, because as much as they could talk to their parents or talk to their trusted adults, this is a new space to navigate. And it was really interesting to gain that from the school awareness programs. And then the other stream of advocating for online safety is through the social media platform itself, which is at the moment only through our Facebook verified page, which usually has different weekly updates that are shared in terms of how individuals could be safe, how businesses could also be safe. We found that earlier in 2019, a lot of our reports came from businesses and not so much individuals, which I will talk about next. And through our social media page, we had engaged more than 200,000 viewers to the page in the 2021 Safer Internet Day week, which was held last month. And so it was really good for us to sort of see how Fiji had evolved in terms of understanding what digital spaces looked like and the power of its benefits. And so one of our mainstreams that we continue to have is through social media. And with that, one of our primary roles as the Online Safety Commission is to receive reports of online abuse or complaints about online abuse. And so taking a look back into 2019, a majority of our complaints came from individuals who raised abuses that were more classified towards defamation than it did with cyberbullying. Only 13% of the reports were classified in that same realm of that Professor Third had mentioned, where it was repeated, where it was targeted, where it involved children and teenagers, but also a majority of them was to young adults. And so that made up only 13% of the reports that we received in 2019. The average age of complainants in 2019 was still in the young adult range of 34 years old, with the most reports received from individuals between 24 and 35. That changed dramatically last year. Not so much with the average age, because we were still receiving reports a lot more from younger adults and adults in general as compared to children. What changed significantly was the amount of cyberbullying reports that we received, which was not an indication that cyberbullying might have occurred more, although that could be a possibility. But it indicated that people knew where to report a lot more. With the signed MOU with Fiji Police, individuals are able to raise their online abuse reports with police posts that are around the country, because the commission is currently only set up in the capital. And so it went from 13% of our reports being classified as online bullying or cyberbullying to 28% of the reports that we received last year being classified as cyberbullying. And the reason we mentioned the majority of the online platform, which might not be a surprise to anyone in this forum, but Facebook continued to be the number one online platform that people had reported online abuse on. even though we saw a rise in the use of TikTok and Instagram throughout the country, because there were a lot more younger people getting engaged with the social media platform or digital platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and Viber. But we were still getting reports that were predominantly on Facebook and not so much on the other platforms. Most of that is to the fact that when people, because we were getting the reports from young adults, a lot of them were on Facebook a lot more than they were on Twitter or Instagram, where we're finding that when we went on these school awarenesses or university campus awareness programs, the students were more engaged on TikTok, on Instagram. And so the different digital platforms also revealed sort of the indication of which age group it reflected, which was very interesting for us to take into consideration last year. And then just a few observations with this year. Our reports this same time last year from January to Feb compared to this same time. So January to February this year compared to this same time last year, it increased dramatically. And I think that's owed a lot to the community awarenesses and the school programs that are being established, particularly with Fiji police and law enforcement and other stakeholder agencies, because it has a lot to do with the awareness and with raising the information that people can report online abuse. Again, it's stressed at these school awareness programs or at these community outreaches that individuals report to the platforms first. And if they cannot gain any redress, then they would report to the Online Safety Commission and we would assist them with that. But a lot of the times what we've found in the past 2.5 years is that most people were reporting abuses that had to do with that were defamatory in nature as compared to cyberbullying or online bullying. When we went to the schools is when they would relay the message back or students would speak out about facing online bullying and they would know where to go, but they felt more comfortable speaking to a friend or talking to an older family member, mostly cousins, compared to speaking to somebody and reporting the issue because they didn't want to get the other person in trouble, but they did just want it to stop. And so either the sibling or the older cousin in the family would tell them that they could report on the platform, that they could ignore, that they could block the users, especially if it was just that one time. The best option was to ignore. But if it continued, then there were different responses that they could take that were more in the family to family situations, and people would talk to the students or people would talk to those who were harming them online or bullying them online. And so we found that students were more interested, or they were more relatable in the terms of speaking to their friends as compared to reporting it as if it were a crime. With that, we saw that individuals did not come to the commission physically anymore for face-to-face reports. So there was a website that was set up in 2019 that individuals could use to lodge their reports with the Online Safety Commission. And so when we set that up, not a lot of people found it clear to use the website. And so as we transitioned into what took place last year with COVID-19, a lot more people found it easier to just lodge their reports directly onto the website or to their nearest police post. And that could be related back to us here at the commission. So more than 50% of our reports were lodged through the website or through Fiji Police, which meant that it decreased a lot more from this same time period last year. those are sort of just the key observations that we made in this year related to online bullying. Most of our reports come from adults at the moment. And so it's only when we reach out to the schools or when we're able to make that connection with students that they feel it necessary to raise the report directly with us. But we are finding that cyberbullying is a concept that's not new to Fiji, but it is something that a lot of us, parents, caretakers included, are trying to navigate what that actually means for Fijians and what that actually means for young Fijians, teenagers and children alike. But at the moment, we will continue to work towards a safer internet for everybody and a safer internet for Fiji. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Annie. I will now hand over to Ms. Talon and Ms. Seri, who will provide an overview of the role of eSafety Commission Australia, having been the first country in the world to develop and implement a cyberbullying complaint scheme. They will also provide an overview of the legislation underpinning the eSafety Commission and its powers in relation to cyberbullying. Kelly and Ella, you now have the floor.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure today to join the Pacific Islands Law Officers Network webinar on cyberbullying. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's been great to share the floor with such esteemed panelists, Professor Third and Commissioner Dunn. Thank you for your presentations. My name is Ella Seri and I'm Assistant Manager of International Strategies and Futures at the eSafety Commissioner. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Kelly Talon, who is the Manager of Online Harms Policy at eSafety. Oh, sorry, just trying to move to the next slide. There's a slight lag here. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with eSafety, let me first give you an overview of what we do and how we do it. So eSafety was established in 2015 and is the world's first government agency solely dedicated to the online safety of its citizens. eSafety leads, coordinates and advises on online safety issues to ensure all Australians have safer and more positive experiences online. We focus on prevention, protection, and proactive and systemic change, and coordinate online safety efforts across government agencies, law enforcement, industry, civil society groups, educators, parents and carers, and children themselves. Australians turn for us for help, knowing we can investigate serious online abuses and help with removal of content and hold perpetrators to account. We have a range of civil powers to compel takedown of illegal or harmful content, whether it's pro-terrorist content, child sexual abuse material, image-based abuse, or serious cyberbullying directed at a child. In February, the Australian government introduced a new online safety bill into Parliament. The bill seeks to expand eSafety's regulatory functions and powers, improving the effectiveness, reach, and impact of eSafety's work. I should emphasise that we are not a law enforcement agency. Rather, we are a regulator working in tandem with law enforcement. It will not surprise you to know that we are busier than ever. We've seen rates of image-based abuse, child sexual abuse material, and cyber abuse increase as the world continues to spend more time online in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. But now, let me hand over to my colleague, Kelly, who will go into some more detail around our cyberbullying powers.
Thank you so much, Ella. And hello, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. As Ella mentioned, we are very proud to be the first country in the world to develop and implement a cyberbullying complaints and takedown scheme, but it is a little bit lonely to be the only ones. And so we are very, very pleased that the commissioner is now in Fiji and doing a similar role to us, and that other countries around the world are also starting to consider this issue and how they might similarly serve as a safety net for children, young people, and others experiencing harms online. So as I mentioned, the scheme serves as a safety net for serious cyberbullying that's not appropriately dealt with by social media services themselves. Like in Fiji, our scheme requires that a child or their trusted adult report first to the social media service where we think the responsibility most lies. Since our establishment in 2015, we've helped over 2,700 children and their families with cyberbullying matters. And what we've found is that cyberbullying is often an extension of bullying that's taking place at school. As Commissioner Dunn mentioned, internet-connected devices enable that bullying to follow kids in their pockets, into their homes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which makes it a serious threat to their well-being in an ongoing way. And the power of our intervention lies in our ability to get that information from children and carers about the broader context of what they're experiencing and provide it to the social media service where bullying material has been posted, so the service has a fuller picture as to the harm that the material is causing, which may not be sort of readily apparent from the face of the particular post or comment. So our current legislation, Ella, if you're able to change the slide, please, thank you. Our current legislation defines cyberbullying as material provided on a social media service, which an ordinary reasonable person would conclude first was likely intended to have a seriously threatening, intimidating, harassing, or humiliating effect on an Australian child under the age of 18. And it's likely that this effect was intended. Professor Third also had the element in the sort of broader definition of cyberbullying about repeated behavior, which we very much acknowledge. I think the reason that didn't make it into the legislation is because we are very focused as a regulatory agency on takedown of material, and it's very hard to set thresholds in terms of numbers of how many posts or comments would have to be online for us to be able to take down action. And just acknowledging the harm that can occur as a result of any singular item of content. And so we are able to action when there is only one item online, as long as it meets that broader threshold. We have found this definition to be a good one, which appropriately captures the scope of complaints that we receive. The definition will remain the same under the proposed new Online Safety Act, which Ella mentioned before. And so on the next slide is a high-level breakdown of the types of cyberbullying complaints we receive. Nearly half of those involve nasty comments or serious name calling. About 1/5 involve fake profiles, and another 5th involve offensive or upsetting pictures or videos. And probably most concerningly, about 14% of the complaints we receive involve threats of violence. Under the current act, eSafety can take reports directly from children and can also accept reports from parents, guardians, and any other responsible person authorized by the child. The act empowers us to address cyberbullying complaint in 2 ways. So first, we can send a takedown notice to a social media service. As I mentioned before, we can only do this if the material has first been reported directly to the service and the service has failed to remove it within 48 hours. Once a notice is sent, the service has an additional 48 hours to action that takedown notice. We can also send a takedown notice to the end user who posted the material. In addition to requiring the removal of the material, the notice can require an apology to the target and a direction not to post any further cyberbullying material. So this will be slightly changed under the proposed new online safety bill, which is actually currently being debated in our Senate at the moment. The cyberbullying scheme will apply to a greater range of services under the proposals. So in addition to social media services, it will apply to things like gaming platforms, messaging services, and other types of apps and websites. And if a takedown notice is sent, the length of time that the service has to remove the material has been reduced from 48 hours down to 24 hours. However, that initial length of time, the 48 hours that they have to action the initial report directly to the service will remain the same. And the commissioner does have a discretion to allow a longer time depending on the circumstances. For example, if there's a proliferation of a particular item of content across the platform that is continually changing and the service needs to adjust its algorithms and things to pick up on the additional items of content. So while it's very, very helpful to have these formal legal powers in our back pocket, to date, we've actually been very successful in taking an informal approach to resolving cyberbullying complaints. The cooperative working arrangements we have with social media services has meant that nearly all of the cyberbullying material we refer informally ends up being removed under the service's community standards without us having to escalate to a formal takedown notice. And the collaborative and holistic way we approach schools, parents, or carers and other authorities has allowed us to address some of the underlying issues contributing to cyberbullying without having to resort to sending a formal notice to an end user. We're very aware that cyberbullying of children is often carried out by other children who may themselves be vulnerable. And we want to approach these situations in a way that's in the best interest of all of the children involved by educating them instead of punishing them. And Professor Third mentioned the importance of taking a human rights-based approach, which we certainly agree with. And it's actually enshrined in our current legislation that any decision we make involving a child, we have to take the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child into account. In that same vein, we work with support services to ensure that children experiencing cyberbullying can get the necessary psychosocial support. So when a person fills out the cyberbullying reporting form, they're asked how they're feeling, including whether they've had suicidal thoughts. This helps us to triage complaints where a person is very upset or at risk of harm and ensure they're connected with counseling and support quickly. Another very important point of referral is the police, of course. There are a number of state, territory, and Commonwealth offenses that might come into play, which might pop up if you keep clicking, Yella, I'm not sure. But that will obviously depend on the nature of the cyberbullying. Where there is an ongoing threat, it might be appropriate to consider applying for a protection order as well. The Act enables us to share information with law enforcement as well as child protection services and other authorities in appropriate circumstances. We have memoranda of understanding, like the Fiji Commissioner, with all of our state and territory police forces, as well as with the Australian Federal Police. The AFP memorandum was recently updated to reflect our reporting obligations, which we have under a new Commonwealth Child Safety Framework. And that framework requires us to report significant risks of harm and certain types of offenses against children to the authorities if we're unable to mitigate those risks. Fortunately, often parents, carers, or other responsible adults are also involved in supporting the child with their complaint. And so we can encourage them to make a report to the police if they need to, rather than making a direct report ourselves. To date, we've encouraged complainants to go to the police in approximately 150 cyberbullying matters, which is only about 5% of the cases that we've seen. And that low number reflects the nature of the cyberbullying we see, which, as I mentioned before, is largely in the form of name calling and nasty comments. And it also reflects the fact that it tends to be carried out by other children. These cases tend to be hurtful, of course, but do not meet a criminal threshold. In the small number of cases where the police are involved, we will work with them to ensure that they have all the evidence they need before we request takedown of material. As Ella mentioned before, we play a complementary role of providing support, guidance, and takedown alongside the law enforcement response. So in summary, the scheme requires that a person start by reporting material to the social media service directly. We encourage people to collect evidence, such as URLs or screenshots of the material. They can send us this material in their report so that we can consider whether the material meets threshold and request its removal if it isn't taken down within the 48-hour period. In the meantime, we connect complainants with support services and urge them to take a variety of self-help steps to reduce their risk of further harm, including blocking the responsible person. Much of this advice can be found on our website, which is not only an important source of information for those who have already experienced harm, but an important awareness raising and prevention tool. And so I'll hand back over to Ella now, who's going to walk us through our broader prevention work. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kelly. And apologies for the slightly erratic slide changes there. I'll have to improve my my slide work for next time. So as Kelly mentioned, whilst our reporting schemes are vital to the protection of Australians online, these powers involve the actions we can take after the damage has been done. But of course, our goal really is to prevent the online harms from happening in the first place. So this is why we also focus on prevention through awareness raising and the provision of evidence-based resources to help Australians have more positive and empowering online experiences. We want to make sure that we're giving people of all ages and backgrounds the right tools to protect themselves online. So our content is tailored to specific audiences to reach children and young people, educators, their parents and carers, people like frontline domestic violence workers and at-risk communities, as well as older Australians. This might include helping them to build up digital resilience or helping people develop strategies for de-escalating risky online situations, improving their digital literacy, or helping them hone their critical reasoning skills. Importantly, as part of our multi-stakeholder approach, we develop resources with communities for communities. We do this by committing to listening to the voices of children and young people to ensure we understand and act on their interests. I'm proud to say that in the past 5 years, we've reached millions of Australians with our education resources and training. We have a whole suite of resources on our website, so please do go and check them out. But the sole responsibility for online safety can't continue to fall solely on the shoulders of children and their often overwhelmed parents. And this is where P, the final P, proactive change, comes in. The digital world should be built with user safety in mind, with safety settings, processes, and provisions built in rather than bolted on. We call this safety by design. Safety by Design is an e-safety initiative launched in 2018 and has been developed with industry for industry. It's involved extensive consultation with industry, NGOs, advocacy groups, and civil society. The premise of Safety by Design is simple enough. When you buy a car, you expect the seatbelts to work. When you get into a lift, you expect it to have an emergency cable. Why doesn't the internet have built into it the safety features we need to protect us? So far, instead of utilising those tools, tech have far too often waited for harms to arise and then, in response to their reputational and revenue risks, bolted on safety features too late. A safety by design approach to developing new technologies would see industries embedding a culture of safety into product and service design. This means considering how a platform and its tools and features can be weaponized to harm and abuse others, embedding safety into all of their internal policies, processes, and procedures, detecting, moderating, and reporting illegal and harmful content, building products to support, amplify, and strengthen human agency and autonomy, as well as being open and transparent about the steps being taken to protect, safeguard, and empower customers. We hope that by providing industry with our safety by design principles, tools, and resources, that we can guide, assist, and enable them to create more positive, civil, and rewarding online spaces, and that this in turn leads to greater and ongoing investment in innovation in this space. So keep your eyes peeled on eSafety's website in the next couple of months whilst we start to roll out some of these tools and features. So just to wrap up, it's been great that we've been able to partner recently with the Fiji Online Safety Commission, so Annie and her staff, as the only other agency besides ours in the world with a mandate and powers to promote the online safety of its citizens. We've been able to do this with funding from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade under its Cyber Cooperation Program. We're really looking forward to continuing our work with the Fiji Online Safety Commission, but we'd also be really keen to engage further with officials in your countries across the Pacific as you consider your own approaches to safeguarding the online experiences of your citizens. Our vision is that one day there will be a network of online safety commissioners, just as there is a robust network of privacy authorities that work together to address shared issues. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about eSafety and our approach to online safety in Australia and our region. Our website includes lots of great information that I really encourage you to look at. And so thank you again, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ella and Kelly. I would now like to open up the floor to any of the participants for any questions. Do we have any questions for our speakers today?
It looks like there may be a question in the comments, I think.
I think I see a question.
Yes, I recognize there's a question from Latrina Makomba. I'll just read out the question for the benefit of everyone. It's a question to Annie, I believe. The question is, what does the Commission do after receiving its complaints?
There's a current complaint scheme that we're going through at the moment. So it's we will receive a complaint, we will assess and investigate a complaint depending on what it is. We ask usually a lot of the reports have been about incidences that have taken place already and might have already been removed, but individuals are interested in who's behind that complaint. And unfortunately, that's not within our remit to find out. But there is an investigation and assessment stage, and if it is deemed viable for any of the criminal offenses that are legislated by the Online Safety Act, then it's vetted legally opinion with a legal opinion and referred to Fiji police for further investigation for possible prosecution. And that's usually what would happen with a majority of our complaints. However, most of them are reports, especially if they're face-to-face reports. They've come in with the profiles or the posts that they're concerned about, and we can usually just guide them through reporting it onto the platform themselves.
Thank you very much. I also have here a question also directed to Annie as well. And the question is, what was the biggest challenge from your perspective in setting up the Fiji Online Safety Commission?
I think these are great questions, but I think there were definitely a lot of different challenges, but I think one of the biggest ones had to have been understanding the scope and sort of the parameters of online bullying in the country and how it was understood in the first place. The Online Safety Act was legislated in 2018, setting up the Online Safety Commission in 2019, and we had the great opportunity to spend a lot of, or majority of 2019, reaching out to students, going to communities and being able to understand what exactly they understood about online safety. Because it was the first one in the country and second in the region, with Australia being the first, we had already an example that was set up, gratefully so, by the eSafety office in Australia. And so it was something that we could draw from. And probably that remains to be one of the biggest challenges, is getting the understanding so that we could appropriately address the issue in the Fiji context and in the Pacific context. Knowing that I think for us, it's such a communal country. And so we think we bring that communal attitude or the Bula spirit onto our online digital spaces. And so it was very interesting to see that even if people didn't know who they were talking to, they engaged in the conversation simply because that's how we are in Fiji. And so it was easier to accept a friend request or start conversations before identifying really who it was. But there were definitely various challenges, but I'm grateful that I got to be part of a team that would take on the challenges rather than think it was too overwhelming.
Thank you, Amy. I have another question here, and this question is directed for Professor Amanda Third. It's in relation to the general comments in relation to the children's rights in relation to digital environment. And the question simply is, how can we contribute to this?
Thank you. That's a really great question. So the Committee for the Rights of the Child formally adopted the General Comment 25 on children's rights in relation to the digital environment earlier this year at the end of January. And now, and it will be formally launched on the 24th of March. So I have popped a link in the chat there to the place where the full text will appear next week, so you're welcome to download it and have a read. But I think now the responsibility rests on the shoulders of the global community, governments, NGOs, private enterprise, families, children, everyone who has a stake in these issues to implement the general comment. To that end, we are developing some explanatory notes to enable states to interpret and to take action on the recommendations that are made therein. And I think also we'll see a series of events this year that are designed to activate the general comment in different locations around the world. If countries involved in this network would be interested in holding an event and to understand more about the general comment, certainly please reach out to me and I will facilitate that, perhaps in conjunction with whoever's interested at the Attorney General's office, but also Anne obviously that might be something we can do together. But yes, so I think please stay tuned. There will be a series of resources that will help us all grab hold of this document and start to enact the kinds of change we want to see.
Thank you very much, Amanda. The next question is also, I believe, directed again at yourself. The question is, with regards to the first presentation on cyber safety education in Solomon Islands, Kiribati, and Papua New Guinea, how is it done? Is it through awareness programs to schools only, or including it in the school's curriculum?
Oh, sorry, James, do you mind clarifying? Do you mean the study itself or the best route for intervention?
Sorry, I'm just reading off the question as it is in the chat.
Sorry, I found it. Thank you. Okay, from Primrose. Thank you. Yes, so basically, I guess what the study showed in terms of online safety education is that we can't simply do this education online, and we can't simply do it in schools. Although schools represent a very important and logical first step, in terms of implementing education for children. Obviously, schools enable us to reach the majority of children, not all children, but many. However, I think, as I tried to indicate in the presentation, really it's not just a case of building children's own understandings of the risks online. It is also about supporting parents, also frontline workers, legislators, really to understand the full nature and extent of the risks. So we need programs that target the different needs of each of these groups ultimately. So obviously that's a very large task. I think schools for children are a very good place to start. And also I think, as these things happen across the region, there's great scope for a lot of information sharing and sharing of best practice and learnings about what works and what doesn't, and sharing resources that perhaps can be tailored to local contexts. There's lots of capacity for all of the nations in the region to support one another as we move towards resolving some of the issues that confront us. So but education across the board for communities is really what came out of the study.
Thank you, Professor Third. The next question is also directed at yourself again, Professor Third. The question is, since the content takes 24 to 48 hours to be removed, what usually happens within that duration, or what advice would you be provided?
Thanks, James. Yes, I might hand that one to Kelly and Ella, I think. They're best positioned to answer that one.
Yes. Thank you. I think that's probably following on from our presentation. So the content, it doesn't always take 24 to 48 hours to be removed, is probably the first point I should make. So we do, in order to use our formal powers under the legislation, we do have to provide 48 hours for the complaint to go to the service first before we can then issue a formal takedown notice. However, if we were to receive a complaint about highly distressing material, we would be inclined to approach the service on an informal basis in a shorter period of time. And as I mentioned, we actually haven't in the cyberbullying scheme escalated to a formal legal notice, because we have been able to action content by contacting services on an informal basis. And because our threshold for cyberbullying is quite high, and many services have terms of use which are a bit lower than that, it generally is the case that the content that comes to us that meets our threshold will violate the service's terms of use, and they'll take it down under their own community standards or terms relatively quickly. That said, in the interim period, while we are working that out, the first step is probably to assess some of those questions about the psychosocial well-being of the person who's made the complaint. So if they seem very distressed, encouraging them to talk to a trusted adult if they haven't already, connecting them with some of those support services that we mentioned in the presentation, Kids Helpline, eHeadspace, some others. We'd also begin assessing the material that's been provided to us to see if it does meet that legal threshold, and then starting to make those informal connections with the service. Ella, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, thanks, Kelly.
No problem. We also give a bit of sort of self-help advice as well around, blocking, muting, taking a bit of a break if the person's very distressed from the content they're seeing online. So we do draw on all those other resources that are available on our website as well and point people to those.
Thank you, Kelly and Ella. The next question is also directed at yourself, Kelly. Question is, do you think that shortening the 24-hour takedown notice will be sufficient enough or effective as compared to the EU and others, for instance, German NEA, which is within 7 days?
So we have, there was a public consultation process around the online safety bill here in Australia, and a number of submissions were made, which did raise the 24-hour takedown period as a concern, particularly for smaller companies. I guess what we've said is in the past, depending on the company, the larger, more mature companies can actually generally action content really quite quickly as long as it's raised to the proper point in the company early on. And so in some cases, we've referred material that's been taken down in a matter of minutes or in a matter of hours. So we know that capability is there, and we want to be encouraging companies to use it where they have it. The new provision in the online safety bill that shortens the period down to 24 hours, they did try to take account of the concerns for companies that might be smaller. They might not have well-established trust and safety teams. And so the commissioner is given the discretion to extend the time period to action a takedown notice if there are reasons to do so. And I think a company being able to establish that they're trying to take action, but don't have the capacity to comply with the notice in the relevant period, I think we would take an approach of trying to work with them, to reduce the amount of time, but acknowledge that there will be practical limitations.
Thank you, Kelly. The next question is also directed at yourself, Kelly and Ella. Can you share your experiences when you removed statements that were raised in complaints?
I might jump in here, Kelly. So I guess it might be useful to provide an example of a cyberbullying case that our investigators have dealt with. So I think one thing that makes our functions quite unique is that they are citizen-centric and citizen-focused. And really our investigators do work with complainants to understand the context of a complaint and help get the material taken down. And I think that's one of the things, that we as we're operating as a safety net, we're able to provide that context. So, for example, there was an incident a couple of years ago where a child was being targeted online because of their surname. And on the surface, if you had reported to a social media site the types of bullying, it wouldn't have come across as bullying. But because the complainant was able to talk to our investigators and his parents were brought in as well, and they were able to explain that actually, being repeatedly sent photos of trucks, he had a specific surname, being repeatedly sent these photos was actually a way to target this young child. And it was through being able to explain that context to the social media service that then we were able to effect the removal of some of these posts, whereas initially, sending many photos of trucks isn't against a site's terms of service. So I think it's actually it shows that context does matter. And I think perhaps Commissioner Dunn, you might be able to feed in on this a little bit more, especially around language and culture and being able to translate that. A lot of these platforms, they're headquartered in the United States and they don't necessarily understand the context of our local communities. So it's being able to provide that translation to them that I think really makes our ability to work on behalf of our citizens much stronger. So, Annie, I'm not sure if you had anything to add to that.
I think just in the context of language and really understanding Pacific culture is also one way that the Commission is able to help in terms of escalating reports that have already been made from Fijian citizens. And so it's been really helpful to also have that relationship with service providers and platforms so that a context could be given to the culture and to the language itself, especially when it's in either the Itoke or the Fiji Hindi language. And so just being able to provide that for the complainant or for the individuals who are reporting to the commission has brought about a lot of relief, because the content is actually removed quite instantly, and we haven't had any trouble with service providers in that.
Thank you for that. The next question is directed at Annie. The question is, how receptive were the members of the legislature to setting up the commission and passing the act? How aware were the members of the legislature about the issue? And did you have to present them with a lot of data in order for them to be receptive to the legislation and the commission?
That's a really good question. I think in terms of legislatures, they had a lot of information provided to them and around them. There was a lot of buildup in terms of online abuse that was happening around the country, and it dated back well before 2018 and even before that. And so it was really interesting to see how quickly legislatures had or were able to come together and really champion for this change, to be able to say that technology is affecting our citizens. And while we have access to technology, we also have these opportunities that might not be so bright, that might not be so great, and actually come as a disadvantage to having access to technology. But I think for them, it was a brave move, because they were able to stand strong to say that they won't let the disadvantage overwhelm us. And so being able to set up the commission in a way where we could cater and provide a space for Fijians to be able to resolve their complaints when it came to online abuse was a really proactive step, in my opinion. And so just being able to set it up and have the commission established by 2019 and having the experience that it's had in 2.5 years has been really eventful, to say the least.
Thank you. The next question here is for Kelly and Ella. It's based on the Australian experience. What tips do you have for Pacific countries that may wish to set up similar bodies to the E-Safety Commission?
Did you want me to take that one, Kelly?
Yes, please.
Sure. So I think for any country that's looking to set up a similar body to the E-Safety Commissioner, I think the first thing that you need to do is to look at your context and have a look at some of the research and reports that are being produced and created by, Professor Third and others working in the region, to really understand the context of online safety in your country. And then it's about, reaching out to others who have set up these sorts of bodies before. So obviously, e-safety here in Australia and the Commissioner in Fiji, we're really open to working with countries to share our information on how we have established and grown our functions. But there are also lots of international resources out there that can help countries in looking to set up sorts of bodies, looking at the sorts of legislation that's required, the sorts of capabilities and capacity. For example, you've got the ITU has developed child online protection guidelines for policymakers. I recommend them as one place that you could go to look at. But I think, one of the things that it's really important to keep in mind is to take a holistic approach. Our model here in Australia that focuses on prevention, protection, and proactive change is really important. It's not simple enough as just having a reporting function. You really need to have that educative function as well to help build those skills. And I know it's something that Fiji is doing, which has been really great to see as well. So yeah, for countries that are interested, please do reach out. We're happy to share more resources as well. You can send us an email directly at international@esafety.gov.au. But yes, it would be really encouraging to see similar sorts of bodies set up across the Pacific. So yeah, we encourage all of your efforts there.
Thank you. We've run out of time, but there are still some questions. I'm sure we have a bit of patience left in all of us to answer a few more questions before we end the webinar. The next question, I'm not so sure who it's directed to, but it's what are the most common cybercrime being reported? So any of the speakers can take that question.
I'm happy to start and then hand off to anyone else who wants to comment. I guess, as Ella mentioned at the beginning, we're not law enforcement. We are a regulatory agency, but there is quite a bit of overlap between the content that eSafety can take reports about and various crimes that exist both at the state and territory and the Commonwealth level. Within this cyberbullying sphere, I would say probably the majority of what we see, given that it is, children saying mean and nasty things to other children, probably doesn't meet the threshold of an offense. That said, where the behavior escalates to sort of violent threats, really repeated harassment, there's a variety of crimes that might apply: stalking, harassment, threats, etc. And we do have a few other reporting schemes. Noting the focus of today is really on cyberbullying. We have a scheme for the reporting of image-based abuse, which is threatened or actual sharing of intimate images without someone's consent. And there, I believe every state and territory in Australia has now also made that an offense. So there is a lot of working between our teams and law enforcement and with the victim who's come to us around which approach would they like to take and in which order, because we have to be very careful not to remove evidence that might be useful for a criminal prosecution. And so, we serve as a bit of an advisory role. We can't give legal advice, but when people come to us with complaints that involve things that do touch over into the criminal sphere, we like to highlight to them that that's the case, that they might be able to go to police, try to help them to pull evidence together for police, and where there might be civil legal options available to them as well. We also have an illegal online content scheme, and the material reported there, it does generally meet the criminal threshold. That deals primarily with child sexual exploitation and abuse material, and also deals with pro-terrorist content. I'm not sure if anyone else had any other comments to add there.
I think similarly, just in terms of Fiji's context, the Online Safety Commission is not law enforcement. And so in terms of cybercrime issues, they have a cybercrime unit with the Fiji Police Force, and they receive more technical reports or terrorism reports that are cyber related. And so that might be an interest just in terms of that question, but we've seen a rise in not only cyberbullying reports, but also just the exchange of buying and selling, which is not necessarily a cybercrime, but because it's done on social media platforms, individuals have felt the need to report that to the commission as well. So that's something that we found an increase in.
Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I'm sure that we all have other commitments to attend to today. If any of the participants have any more questions, they can be answered offline, and feel free to email your questions through, and they will be answered through email. Now, I would like to thank our speakers for sharing with us their insight into how we can better reduce instances of and protect children from cyberbullying in our region. It is clear from today's presentations that this topic is relevant to all of us and has given us important considerations as we continue to adapt to the COVID-19 world in the year ahead. I would like to also extend my thanks to Jasmine for keeping up with our speakers. We look forward to seeing the finished product. Thank you to Sai and Rosie from the PILON Secretariat for their hard work in putting this event together. And finally, thank you to the PILON members and friends of PILON who have joined us today and who remain committed to reducing cybercrime in our region. Your contributions are valued, and by sharing our insights, we are better able to build trust and improve collaboration in relation to these important issues. We would appreciate it if you would fill out a short survey at the end of this event so that we can continue to deliver webinars that are of interest to you. The link for the survey will now be provided in the chat function. Have a pleasant day, and we look forward to seeing you virtually at our next PILON webinar. Malo apito, no foa.